A greeting again today. Hello. We're carrying on with our presentation on digestion. I promised that we would get into another whole aspect that a missionary doctor taught the world about. But before that, there's something that we really need to say about this problem of the sphincter at the lower end of the esophagus just before you get into the stomach. There's something we didn't mention that we really must mention. We talked already about the things that tend to relax the sphincter. Remember? The vices, tobacco, alcohol, caffeine, and we mentioned mint will relax that sphincter. But there's something else that really makes a problem for the contents of the stomach going back up, especially after a large meal, and probably an added problem, definitely, would be drinking carbonated beverages with their carbon dioxide, the fizzy bubbles that come up. But the real issue that really makes big problems is when you've eaten that big meal and then you lie down. A person that eats a big meal and then lies down is setting himself up for this reflux to occur, especially if you've been using any of those things that relax that sphincter. How long do we need to wait before we can lie down after eating? Well, again, that depends on how much is in the stomach. And we talked about that at some length. Remember what delayed food in the stomach was fats, oils. But we could give a general rule that at least a couple of hours, and better yet, 3 hours, is a good length of time to wait after you've eaten before you lie down. Instead of lying down after eating, take a walk. I'm not saying to go running, because a very heavy exercise has such a demand on the blood and the heart that there's a tug of war between the needs for the blood in the digestive system and for the heavy exercise. But walking is a gentle exercise, and you don't need to do sprint walking. Just do a gentle walk for 15, 20 minutes or a half an hour. And there's plenty enough reserve from the heart to take care of digestion while you're doing the walking. Don't lie down after the meal. That really doesn't apply to drinking water. It's when you have a meal there with the pepsin that's going to be breaking apart the wall of the esophagus. You lie down after a meal and you're setting yourself up for esophagitis. You're also setting yourself up for stretching that sphincter here and letting the stomach contents come up and change the structure of the esophagus into what would be called a hernia. And that gives longer-term structural change and problems. So we don't want any of that. And I think we've said enough to make it clear how to avoid it. Now, getting down further in the digestive system, we won't spend more time looking at the small intestine. Some of the problems we mentioned in the stomach apply to the small intestine. The small intestine puts out more protein-digesting enzymes, not exactly pepsin, but other ones that act in a similar way. But when the food has been digested and it gets down near the end of the small intestine, the next stage in the journey is going into the large intestine, the colon. And if the food content has been what we've mentioned so far as major nutrients, starches, or we could say carbohydrates, that will be totally digested. If you totally digest carbohydrates, that means the starch and sugars, protein, it'll all be digested up, and fats will be digested. We haven't gone into the details of fat at all, but those things will be totally digested. They will have disappeared from the contents of the digestive system, and all that would be left would be maybe a bit of watery fluid. Actually, the colon takes out water, and you'd be left with, looks like, nothing. The trace things, the vitamins and so on, are all absorbed. Having nothing in the colon after it takes out the water means the person would not move his bowels. And that actually happens. There are people that go a week or more between bowel movements. That's a serious problem. Well, here's where the story of this missionary to Africa comes in. He worked in England as a physician for a while before he became the missionary. And in his work in England, he encountered the kinds of problems that are common in England. Included in those were appendicitis. He also saw the problem that happens to the colon at times, where part of it, a little section, a small area of the colon, will actually balloon out. Maybe I could show this here. The colon, if we're talking about a person here, legs down here, diaphragm up here. And so the colon starts where the small intestine ends. The colon comes off. It has a little outpouching called the appendix. And here you have the ascending colon going up toward the diaphragm, and then it goes crossways, the transverse colon, and then it comes down. The descending colon curls around a bit and goes into the rectum and out the exit. Now, here at the appendix, problems can occur, at least depending on how the person's living. And this doctor, whose name is Dr. Burkitt, he saw appendicitis, inflammation of the appendix. And it can become so severe that the appendix actually ruptures, which is a surgical emergency. And appendicitis, even before rupturing, can give plenty of pain, a serious problem. He saw not only appendicitis that had to be operated on, he saw I mentioned it and I didn't talk further, he saw this little outpouchings called diverticula, where the contents of the colon can actually go into this little balloon. These tiny hollows going off from the colon are called diverticula, and when they get inflamed, it's diverticulitis. If it's not inflamed, it's diverticulosis. But when it's inflamed, it can cause pain, problems. He saw that in England. He saw colon cancer. Colon cancer is a big cancer. It kills many people every year, and it's one of the most common cancers. He saw plenty of that. Another thing you might think of as less important, but it's significant. People certainly don't like to have varicose veins showing up in their legs, bulgings out that you can see so easily, and they end up making the whole leg, if it's bad enough, swell, and if it gets really bad, the skin can erode and may be a real mess. He saw all of those things that I mentioned as common problems in England. He got set to do his mission work. He chose an area in Africa where the people were not in cities. They lived in a simple, primitive style. because they were poor, they didn't have many animals, they did not eat much meat at all, but they did eat their garden produce, and they ate food that was not highly processed. We haven't talked about what is in food aside from those major nutrients, the starch, the protein, the fat, but another major component of food in the ideal diet, which is a plant diet, is the part that does not end up getting digested and put into the bloodstream. Instead, it stays in the colon and goes out the exit. Well, mankind, as they began to study and understand the digestive system, they looked at that as being waste, which it is, and therefore all this stuff that makes it up, which we call fiber, as being waste. It's of no use at all. At least that was the way it was thought. And so they started getting rid of the fiber in food. Now, all plant food has fiber. But if you do things to the plant food, you can get rid of the fiber. In fact, any vegetable oil has no fiber in it. The oil has been extracted from the food that it came from. Olive oil, corn oil, any of the different vegetable oils, if you go back to the source of that oil, all has fiber. Well, Dr. Burkitt noticed that this fiber in the food of the Africans made a real difference in their health. Those diseases that he saw in England that we just mentioned, he hardly saw at all, if at all. Where he saw those diseases in Africa is when he visited the cities. There they had some of the same problems they did in England, but the people that lived simply and naturally did not have it. He saw no case of colon cancer in the people that lived out in the countryside in Africa. Varicose veins were unusual. The diverticulitis, the appendicitis just didn't happen. And Dr. Burkitt was one of those that began to understand that this is because of the fiber that's in food. We mentioned that if a person eats food that has no fiber, how it'll stay, the colon doesn't need to empty because there isn't much of content in it, and the person can go a week or more between bowel movements. Very unhealthy. That waste product, by the time a week has gone by, some of the contents of it, we could say, is kind of toxic. At least it's no good at all for that contents to stay in the same location in the colon. And it irritates and ends up causing eventually cancer. Why would it cause the problem of varicose veins? That's a good question. Well, when you have fiber in food, the fiber makes the movement of the bowels easy. The bowels move easily. The person doesn't have to strain when they're out on the toilet. On the other hand, when a person has not been eating fiber and they're on the toilet on the third, fourth, fifth day since the last time, by that time the colon has taken out the water, the contents are dried, and the person is going to have to work hard. He's going to be straining at the toilet. And when you put pressure of straining on your abdomen, it puts pressure on everything in the abdomen, including the veins. Veins in the body, unlike the arteries, the veins should have very little pressure on them. If you put pressure on the blood that's in the veins, it really affects them. Let's draw a picture of a vein here. A long vein in the legs. And we mentioned that unlike the arteries that have the pressure of the heart pumping on, the veins have basically zero pressure, and so the blood would not get back up to the heart except for the fact that our muscles contract. When you walk, you push a little bit of blood up, but it would fall right back except for the fact that the veins have valves. There are valves here that catch the blood and don't let it fall back. As soon as you use your muscles again, walking again, the blood goes through the valve. It opens up for movement in the upward direction, and then as soon as the blood would fall back, it closes. That system works fine if the valves are working. But when the person strains at the toilet, putting pressure on, what physicians call a Valsalva maneuver, the kind of thing we do when we try to blow up a balloon that is hard to blow up. That kind of pressure goes into the veins, and when it does that, it can rupture these vein leaflets so that they lose their capacity. So all that pressure now is not held just in that small section of vein, but all the way down the leg, and it bulges the veins in the legs. Well, Dr. Burkitt, when he left Africa, he became you could say, a missionary to the rest of the world, talking about how the Africans taught him that we need our food prepared in a simple form. We need the fiber that's in the food. So the question becomes, how much fiber is there in meat? You know, when you look at meat, it looks like it has fibers. Those are strands of muscle in it. How much fiber in this sense of nutrition is there? Well, the answer is 0. All those strands that are in meat are not fiber in this nutritional sense. They're strands of muscle that are going to get totally digested. They're protein that's going to be cut apart and then enter into the bloodstream. Meat has no fiber. Eggs have no fiber. Milk has no fiber. And all the dairy products have no fiber at all. Where is the fiber? It's in all the plant products that are kept whole. Now you can get plant products without fiber that we just mentioned. You can extract oil from plant products, but that's not eating the plants in their natural form. But all the plant products, fruits, nuts, grains, vegetables, all have fiber if we eat them in their natural form. And they give plenty of fiber to make the action of the colon easy. A person that eats that way will usually move their bowels not only once a day, they'll often have a bowel movement after every meal. There is a reflex that has a connection between the stomach and the colon, the rectum. When the stomach gets full, it sends a message by nerve down to the rectum saying, we're loaded up here, you better make room for more food that's coming down. And sure enough, the person senses the need to go to the bathroom. That's the gastrocolic reflex. Gastro is stomach, colic for colon, reflex. And so a person that's eating in this good, wholesome way will move their bowels often after any meal. Dr. Burkitt characterized this whole thing in an interesting way. He noticed that where people have been eating in this way with fibers, of course they're going to have frequent and actually large bowel movements because that's what fiber will produce. And his conclusion was, where you have large bowel movements, the hospitals are small. Where you have small amounts of bowel waste, the hospitals are big. That, I think, gives us enough to understand that we need to keep the fiber in our foods. And I hope that this series that we've done will guide you all into a good pattern of eating and digestion. Thank you.